Hi, I'm Peter Landau, managing editor of Newsjunkie.net, and today I have our staff reporter, Morgan Kreisel, with me. He puts out a Prairie Fire newsletter among many of his responsibilities. We wanted to talk about the most recent one today, but before we do, just give me a quick overview of what the Prairie Fire project in Newsjunkie is, Morgan.
Prairie Fire is covering the wave of independent research and data collection that has sprung up as the government is pulling back its research and its data collection apparatus.
And your most recent newsletter that we're going to go into a little bit today is on surveillance. And you frame what you write about as a shift from public data serving the people to surveilling them. And you're convinced that this shift is structural, it's not just a blip. Maybe you can go into a little bit of how you came to that conclusion.
This is a beyond Trump thing. Part of that is because what Trump has done with data and with the structure of our federal government is profoundly damaging, that it's just can't be contained to his administration. When you're doing things like destroying entire branches of the federal government, the education department, what they're trying to do, when you are laying off thousands of government employees, shutting down over 50 research stations like they're doing at the forestry department. These kinds of things took decades and decades to build up and to maintain, and just taking a hammer to them willy-nilly is it's just not going to be a contained thing. It will take probably decades to build back up to what we had. And then on the kind of data surveillance side, the surveillance state has been building up along with the rest of the government data. It's been decades and decades of building as well. Trump didn't start the Department of Homeland Security operations and the measures that were in place that extended before Trump, and it's not just his thing, but he is given the reins of this structure that was already in place and is just going crazy.
But you argue that data collection isn't disappearing, right? It's being repurposed. So, what is the clearest real world example of that shift?
Certain parts of it are disappearing. I would say, for example, certain collections have been removed. The USDA's food security survey was removed. That's an example of a real world thing being gone. And we have stuff like vaccine databases from the CDC that haven't been updated or were paused. Government data collection on the whole isn't gone because not everything has been taken away. The stuff that's untouched is the surveillance stuff. It's the stuff that wasn't helping anybody. It wasn't publicly accessible. It's just for national security.
Your
And
argument in the newsletter basically is that what was being collected to facilitate various programs and help people in the United States is now basically being used to, I think, cage them is the analogy that you used. How do you think most of the readers are misunderstanding how their data is being used? Probably most people don't know the extent of this slow, decades long shift.
I think people probably don't understand how serious your phone spying on you is. I feel like people make a lot of jokes about, oh, the FBI agent in my phone is watching me watch YouTube videos while I fall asleep, or my Alexa always knows what I want. Isn't that funny? It's not funny. It's serious because the data collection that comes from stuff like Alexa, stuff like what you do on Instagram, your Amazon purchases, these metrics are available for the government to buy. Data brokers collect this stuff. Amazon will sell what you have looked at to a data broker like Experian, who will then collect it. These data brokers will brag about being able to sort people into different profiles. They can sort you by your political preference, for example. So when you have an administration that's interested in suppressing certain political opinions, going after leftist organizers and things like that, your phone knowing that you are into leftist organizing is a danger, and that can be used against you.
Regardless of who's in charge, the left or the right, you're being profiled and that can be used against you. But I don't believe you're arguing against no government data. So, how do you distinguish between what's legitimate and what is crossing the line into our right to privacy?
I think that's the question, right? I think that legitimate government data use needs to be tied to a service. It needs to be for the people, and it needs to have transparency and accountability measures in place to make sure that's happening. When you have these government black boxes where there's no oversight, we don't know what the collection is precisely, who has it, or the parameters of it, that is a huge red flag that can be used for anything. The thing that will keep it from being used as a weapon is making sure that it's being used for the public good.
And like you said, you've traced back the genesis of where we are today in terms of data collection back decades. There was the post 9/11 surveillance, third party doctrine, etc. Which of these do you think is the most responsible for where we are now? Or is there one that you can pinpoint?
The boring, nuanced answer is that they all play a part, right? If I had to pick one, I would probably say the third party doctrine. It's the oldest of the things that I mentioned in the newsletter. That is what established that your right to privacy ends as soon as a third party has access to it, which now that we live most of our lives, I would say through the internet, a third party is always involved.
Do you see the current moment as a legal failure, technological failure, inevitability, or a political choice?
I definitely see it as a legal failure. I think it's also a very intentional choice by the administration. I don't see it as a technological inevitability. I think this is a very unnatural way for technology to progress. I feel that, I don't know, the early days of the internet, I mean, I wasn't there because that was a million years ago, but it had this spirit of cooperation and community that I think has been exploited and driven out in a way
You've
that
heard the term shitification. Basically, it started as this useful tool and then became monetized and exploited to the point where it's now the complete opposite.
nobody wants to develop technology that makes people's lives worse, which is what social media has become now, and all of these things that are used to spy against us. I think this is inevitability of technology under capitalism.
What does the surveillance infrastructure actually look like in practice? Who's building it and how connected is it?
We have the government surveillance, law enforcement surveillance coming from Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security, and then recent FBI surveillance, like SPM 7 stuff. That's what I've been referencing, where the FBI is under orders to search out what the Trump administration deems as political extremism as a way of counteracting domestic terrorism. So that's one branch of it, is the actual coming from the government surveillance. The other is from private companies. So we talked about social media, selling your data to data brokers, and we also have existing government data that's from stuff like the IRS, from Medicaid and Social Security. The thing that's scary is that they are trying to connect a lot of that now. The Intercept broke the story with freedom of the press that the government is consolidating all of their information on us into one giant database. So we used to have a kind of data firewalls between the IRS and Homeland Security, for example, where you were more protected from being under surveillance because the IRS and the Department of Homeland Security weren't talking to each other. But those are being broken down. They are consolidating them into a large database that they can then use like AI models on to sort through super quickly. And also just having it all in one place makes it super vulnerable to hacking, to attacks from whoever. It's these private and government, new and pre-existing, but all being more and more connected. Of course, you have ties from the administration to these big data broker tech people like Mark Zuckerberg. So just becoming more and more connected every day.
As a journalist, I'm just curious how this shift affects you and journalism in general, especially those working with sensitive data sets.
For journalists, this is a problem because as we're seeing with the FBI and SMP, the domestic terrorism watch list, if you are going against the narratives of the administration, they are watching you. They want to know what you're saying, how you said it, where you are when you said it, who you're talking to. That's very scary for journalists. I think when it comes to sensitive data sets, things like working with immigrant communities and maintaining contacts with them, that would be a super sensitive data set to have under this administration. I think just that kind of added pressure is something that affects journalists.
Are we entering a period where journalists will have less access to data while the government has more?
I think that's what they want, definitely. There is a lot of independent data collecting happening, independent research. There's other places that you can turn to that aren't government sources, and that's what Prairie Fire is about, collecting them and facilitating their work so that we're not left without data, so that we still have access to this important knowledge.
Is there a version of centralized data collection that isn't harmful, or is the structure itself the problem?
When you're centralizing anything, information, power, whatever, it opens it up to be taken over by the first bad actor who gets that power, who gets access to the centralized resource. I think you need so many safeguards and accountability measures and rules and bureaucracy, which nobody likes, in order to keep that from happening. We're seeing how quickly all of those safety measures can be just yanked away. There's benefits to having huge centralized swaths of data, but do they outweigh the risks? I don't know. I think there at the very least needs to be alternative sources. There needs to be independent research and data collection happening just because it makes the whole ecosystem healthier, but also because this is what centralized data gets us.
Speaking of risks, how should journalists think when collecting sensitive data from their sources in this environment?
Protecting your sources is a top priority, especially if you're working with vulnerable communities. I think you need to be as paranoid as possible while still getting the work done. The most important thing is to be able to keep holding power to account, to keep speaking up for the people who are the most affected by the administration and the damage that it's doing, because we're in it for the long game. So cover yourself, but keep going.
To wrap it up, if you were to distill your newsletter into one takeaway for our readers, what should they do differently starting tomorrow?
I think starting tomorrow, you should throw away your Alexa, your Google Home, probably turn your Siri off in your settings. You don't need that. It's not worth the little personal assistant who will turn around and tell Big Brother what you've been up to. Limit tracking and data sharing wherever you can, going into your social media settings and turning off targeted ads or whatever cookies you need to. This is also a safety thing. I know Instagram just announced recently that they are ending end-to-end encryption on their DMs, their messaging system, which allows Meta and Instagram to see what you send each other. Be aware of stuff like that, keep on top of it, and Yeah, do whatever you can to block tracking. I know there's different browser extensions. I mentioned one in the newsletter from the Electronic Frontier Foundation called Privacy Badger, which was super easy. I installed it in 10 seconds and it's pretty non-intrusive. I'll be keeping the readers updated, and I hope that people want to come along on this data protection journey with me.
Thank you, Morgan. They definitely should. And for people that are watching or listening, they should go to newsjunkie.net/prairie-fire and they can sign up for your newsletter. Or they can go to newsjunkie.net/newsletter and see all of your newsletters and all the newsletters that we've published over the years.